Botany is the study of plants. Plants are divided into two parts: plants with seeds and plants with no seeds. If they don't have seeds, they have spores. Yes, plants have spores, but not all of them. Only a small category of plants have spores, but majority of plants, as we know, have seeds. Plants are then further divided and categorized as being vascular and non-vascular. Vascular means having tissues or tubes. These are going to be more tall plants. The short plants, such as mosses, are going to be non-vascular because they can just absorb water in the ground, pass them on from cell to cell. So let's explore more about plants. Here we have the classification of non-vascular and vascular seedless plants. So we're going to start with seedless plants, and these plants, as I just said, have spores. Vascular seedless plants have tissues, and these tissues carry food and water up to the leaves or to the fronds of ferns. So this is for tall plants, trying to get the water from the roots or the root-like structures up to the tip of the tall plant. Now remember, plants are eukaryotes. They have membrane-bound organelles, and specifically they are classified as having chloroplasts, along with roots, stems, and leaves. Seedless non-vascular plants. These are the short plants with no tubes. These plants also have spores. So there are no tubes or tissues in these plants that carry water. There's no seeds, only spores. An example of this category, this phylum, is Bryophyta. Bryophyta describes mosses. Bryophyta includes mosses. Now, mosses are small non-vascular plants. They can absorb the water. They're usually in very moist environments in which they're dependent on that water to pass that water from cell to cell. There's no true roots. They have more of something like a holdfast called a rhizoid. They don't really have true stems or leaves either. They do have something called a waxy cuticle. A cuticle is a waxy outside protective covering. A cuticle usually is going to be covering a leaf in most plants, but in this case it's covering a lot of the body of the moss to prevent water loss. So it wants to absorb that water and not lose it. And then those root-like structures, as I just said, are called rhizoids. They kind of anchor the plant, but it does not absorb water. So the absorption of water is more from the body of the moss, not from the rhizoid. Now, as we said, mosses are dependent on the moist water environments. They can survive some dry spells, but generally they need that water. Water moves from cell to cell through diffusion. Remember, we learned diffusion. The water compound is going to be spread from cell to cell, and mosses usually reproduce both sexually with spores. They reproduce usually asexually and sexually, and we said specifically by spores. Now, there are benefits to mosses. Specifically, they will decompose dead wood. They are pioneer plants. If a spore lands in a certain area that does not have a lot of or soil, but it's more bare rock, the spore of the moss can grow and break down that rock and ground and turn it into actual good soil for other plants to actually grow. They really help it prevent erosion. They provide shelter for insects and small animals, and also they can be used for nesting material. You may have also heard about peat moss, which can be used to be burned as fuel. Now we're going to move to seedless vascular plants. So these plants, again, do not have seeds. These have spores, but these are going to be the vascular plants. These tall plants need to have these tubes. So there are tubes that carry food and water in vascular plants because they are taller. There could be no diffusion here. The phylum example is Pteridophyta or Pterophyta. These are ferns. The characteristics of vascular plants, as we said before, consists of the water-carrying tubes and the food-carrying tubes. The specific name for the water-carrying tube is the xylem. The specific tube that carries food or sugar is going to be the phloem. Xylem carries water up the plant, while phloem carries food down. And when we talk about seed plants, when we talk about trees, we'll get into more detail about that. Now, specifically ferns, as you can see, they are taller, they're growing. These are going to actually be the largest group of seedless vascular plants. Now, ferns are going to be the largest group of seedless vascular plants. They can live in a wide variety of habitats, meaning they can live in either terrestrial environments, which is on land, or they can live in aquatic environments, meaning in water or near water. They can reproduce both sexually and asexually. Specifically, they're going to reproduce asexually by spores, but they can reproduce asexually the fern from the underground rhizome. Now, the underground rhizome is like a horizontal root. And as you can see in the picture, these horizontal modified roots, now these can reproduce and grow from these horizontal stem-like structures that grow underground, and little ferns can grow off of that. So that's a form of asexual reproduction. Now, the leaves of ferns are called fronds, and these fronds can curl up, and when they actually curl up, or if you have a little newly forming frond, it's going to be called a fiddlehead. And then on the bottom or the underside of the frond, you're going to have these spore cases. And these spore cases are called sori. Here you can see the frond, the leaf-like structure of the fern. You can see the rhizome, the horizontal underground stem. And from that, some new ferns can grow. Now, the rhizoid would be the actual kind of little root-like structures coming off of the rhizome. Here is the sexual and asexual reproduction of the fern. We're going to start with the left side with the adult fern and the spores coming off of the frond or coming out of the sori of the frond. This is asexual, so the spore falls off. As the spore grows in the ground, it does not form a fern. This is something you need to know. It actually grows a heart-shaped prothallus. Please write down that term. It's called a prothallus. This heart-shaped plant actually contains both the male and the female gametes. It contains the sperm and the egg of the plant. So, on the heart-shaped prothallus, it actually goes through sexual reproduction. So when the sperm fertilizes the egg, from that comes the actual fern we know growing out of the heart-shaped prothallus. And that in turn grows and forms the adult fern. Here's another picture of the sexual and asexual reproduction of the fern. If we start with the adult, you can see the little sori, the little spores coming from the frond, and then forms the prothallus. There's the word prothallus for you. Please write that down. Please be aware of that. That heart-shaped prothallus has the male and female parts, and that's the sexual reproduction occurring. And then that process happens again